My knee throbbed in pain while Regent Oakmore spoke to the High Dragon in a language that I couldn't understand. Oddly, though, every once in a while I would hear something that I understood. It didn't take long to put two and two together. Are they speaking High Drakon? The same language that was on the pods? I asked Ten. Probably. What they are speaking is fairly similar to Drakon, Ten said. The translation program is even triggering on some of the words, as you've likely noticed. It would seem they share root words. Can you translate it? No, not yet. I've already been trying to extrapolate a translation, though. We'll see how it goes. The Regent and the dragon continued talking to each other. It wasn't hard to tell that the dragon seemed upset about something, and Oakmore looked confused. Then Oakmore turned to me. Nick, have you been in contact with gods? He asked. I looked at Yulk, Nash, and Renv. I hadn't exactly lied to them, but they're bound to be confused. Should I lie? A glance at the dragon answered that question for me. Okay, the truth then. I took a deep breath and steeled myself. I think so, I said. When we were on our way here, we were attacked by bandits. There was an explosion, and one of our friends was hurt really bad. I used a healing spell on him, but ended up using all of my magic and passing out. While I was out, I had a weird dream that I'm not sure is a dream, and there was a thing in my dream that said mortals call it a god. I see. Oakmore's brow furrowed. Did it demand anything from you? It didn't feel like a demand, more like a suggestion, I replied, trying not to look at Nash and Yulk. It said that if I didn't go to see the High Dragon, I wouldn't find my way home. Did it say anything else? Any suggestions as to what to do when you saw King Icinerath? It said is that I needed to see the draw. King Icinerath because some stupid Mer were about to do some stupid things which would prevent me from going home, and that my path would be clear after seeing him, I answered. Oh, it also said that other gods are watching me because I'm amusing. That's all it was able to say. Able to? Yes, it was under a pact and had bright red chains all over it. Understood. Oakmore turned back to the dragon for a moment, then turned back to me. Wait, what was the other choice? Besides seeing King Icinerath? Shit. Well, it said that Yulk would want to see some scholars that he knows to get the words translated, but the translation wouldn't get us anywhere. It told me that he would decline an invitation to see the High Dragon, and that I would need to make sure he didn't decline the invitation. Oh, Yulk whispered. Oakmore nodded and turned back to the dragon. The two began to speak once more, and after a few moments the ember-red eyes of the High Dragon took on a slightly pink tint, and he began to look at me. It felt like he could see everything about me, and I got the distinct impression that I couldn't hide anything from him. It was an uncomfortable feeling, like someone walking into the bathroom with you and not leaving. The two continued talking, when suddenly Oakmore prostrated. He gave a speech, and Icinerath growled at him. After a quick back and forth, Oakmore raised his head. The king said something angrily, and Oakmore stood. He began gesturing dramatically, which was a confusing turn of events. Done, Ten said, applying translation patch. Simply exceptional that his motives are driven by love, and love is such a rare form of motivation in the world. This is why I beg that you to aid him any way you can. I will consider it. How would my assistance be applied? Icinerath asked. It may not be the smartest move to speak up now, but I get the feeling that the king will be less mad at an interruption than he would be at eavesdropping. I took a deep breath and gathered my nerve once again. Excuse me, Your Majesty, I interrupted. Can you understand me now? It felt like every eye within listening distance turned to look at me. A quick glance around confirmed my feeling to be factual, and I suddenly felt very, very nervous, like I had committed the sort of taboo that is so obvious that everyone should know not to do it. I can, Icinerath said warily. Explain. Explain. Explain what? I looked at Oakmore, but he was completely dumbfounded and at a loss for words. The almost glowing eyes of the High Dragon narrowed at me, and I felt the sudden urge to improvise like my life depended on it. Before I could open my mouth, Ten stepped in. Repeat after me. I have a machine in my head that translates languages, Your Majesty, I parroted. It did not know High Dracon, but it knows Dracon, and was able to decipher what yourself and Regent Oakmore were saying by the context of our situation and comparing the two languages in real time. King Isinerath took a deep breath in through its nose, which immediately made me think of all the dragons I've seen in media that breathed fire. I tensed, but the flames never came. Surprise after surprise, he grumbled. Regent, tell the civilians to go on about their business. I would speak to this boy. Yes, sire, Oakmore bowed. As Oakmore began telling everyone present to go back to what they were doing, which appeared to confuse the chaperone of a group of children, Isinerath lowered his head nearer to me. You are trying to get back home to your ailing lover, yes? Isinerath asked softly. Yes, Your Highness. And what, pray tell, will you do if she is dead by the time you return? The question caught me off guard. It had been nagging at me somewhere in the back of my mind, but I had consciously avoided actually thinking about it, as if thinking about it would somehow turn it into a reality. Being directly confronted with the truth of the possibility like this made me realize that I had been acting childish, pretending that it can't happen simply because I don't want it to happen. I would grieve, Your Majesty, I answered, unable to meet his eyes. As one should, Isinerath said, his head returning to where it had been. It would be wrong of me to prevent the reunification of lovers, and it would be outright malicious of me to prevent one from mourning. I will aid you, boy. Thank you, sire. There is still the matter of how. I do not have the ability to transport you to your world, nor am I aware of any means to do so. We have some writings. They were found on the altar that I was resting on, and we believe they're written in High Dracon, or a language that is similar to High Dracon, I explained. I turned to Yulk and whispered for him to show Isinerath the writings. He didn't hesitate to reach into his robe, but gave me a look indicating that he had many questions while he did so. Isinerath leaned forward to study the rubbings that Yulk had done. These do not say much, but their context is grim, Isinerath explained. The first 5 symbols appear to be options: close, open, begin, end, and destroy. Then there are 4 directional indicators with the word select in the center. That's not much to go on, I said. We already knew that they were experimenting on me, Your Highness. Indeed, but I now see why the gods sent you to me. His face twisted into what could be called a grin. Back in my youth, my father tasked me with ridding these lands of a plague. A cult of anonymous individuals who were kidnapping, torturing, and dismembering members of our citizenry. The investigators at the time believed the torture to be experimentation, and the purpose of the dismemberment was to hide their findings and mask their trail. The last time I saw the final symbol on this paper, it was emblazoned upon on their robes. My heart skipped a beat. Is this it? Who were they? We weren't able to find out. Whenever one of their members was captured or killed, they would be incinerated from within by a flame that could not be quenched until they were but ash. Adventurers that were tasked with tracking them were able to discover their hideouts within Bolasir, and my father sent me forth to eliminate them from the land. They were quite magically adept, but no match for even a fledgling high dragon, he explained, with a hint of pride in his voice. I flew from hideout to hideout, killing as I went. I was even careful to preserve as much as possible, yet the hideouts still did not yield many clues. How long ago was this, Your Highness? I asked, hoping we could investigate one of these hideouts. I eliminated the cult from Bolasir long before the demons invaded, but they remained a problem in other kingdoms. Once the demons invaded, all cult activity ceased, and they were not heard from during the entirety of the demon occupation. Some claimed that it was the cult that brought the demons to our world. Others believed that whatever the cult was researching was a threat to the demons, and the demons invaded our world to force them to cease and desist. I paused for a moment to digest this information. A nameless cult that may have had something to do with the demonic invasion had somehow kidnapped me from my world and performed experiments on me, maybe to make me fight for or against the demons. That definitely sounds like it could be the plot of an isekai, but why would the cult go to such lengths? Wouldn't it be easier to use their own members? Sire, do you know anything else about this cult? I asked. I do, Icinerath said with another grin. They were most disruptive in a kingdom to the west, ruled by dwarves. At the time, I believed that this was because their leadership had taken refuge there, but my father wisely forbade me from interfering in the affairs of other kingdoms. I made certain that no trace of the cult remained in Bolasir, but it's likely that other kingdoms were less thorough. As a matter of fact, your existence is evidence of that being the case. Psst, Yulk whispered. What's going on? I gave Yulk a brief explanation as I thought about what Icinerath had told me. The mighty high dragon wasn't going to be able to get me home directly, but he had at least pointed me in a direction. West, to the Dwarven Kingdom. A small blossom of hope grew within me. The Dwarven Kingdom has to have something. Why else would the creepy god thing have sent me to the dragon? The Dwarven Kingdom to the west would probably be the Empire of Calcuti. It predates the demonic invasion, and even the Kingdom of Bolasir, Yulk explained. I nodded and turned back to Icinerath. Are you meaning the Empire of Calcuti, Your Highness? Calcuti is the name, but it was not an empire before the demons. What is its current status, Regent? Icinerath asked. It's thriving, my lord, Oakmore replied, turning his attention away from a growing flock of civilians. Of course the pesky little buggers yet persist, the High Dragon grumbled. And we have a contractual alliance with them, Your Highness. Icinerath's face contorted in disgust, and Regent Oakmore tried to hide a smile. I guess the High Dragon isn't a fan of dwarves. I glanced at Renv, glad that he couldn't understand the conversation. I was met with a look of concern and confusion. Allied with them? Icinerath nearly spat. What a foolish regent we have. Tell me, Oakmore, what fancy baubles and little luxuries did the dwarven royal family provide, that you and your kin may offer your backs as sheaths for their daggers? The dwarven royal line died out, sire. They fell in battle against the orcs shortly after you entered your slumber. The current ruler, Emperor Jock, is of the Norev family, and though he is crass at times, he is much less prone to subterfuge and dishonesty than the royal family was. Icinerath frowned, but I looked at Oakmore in a new light. I thought he was a whimsical and reluctant regent, but he had done his homework. He seemed to know the High Dragon's blind spots and exactly how to compensate for them. Fine, Icinerath sighed. I give the alliance my blessing, then. Returning to the original matter, Nick, you will need to seek more information on this cult in Calcuti. I hope you are more successful in your investigation than others were in the past. I grow weary, and as such will return to my slumber. If I may, Your Highness, Oakmore interjected, we have had quite a long while to come up with a potential solution to the demon within you. Oh? Icinerath asked, warily eyeing Oakmore. If we were to encase the remains in concrete, it would prevent the demon from moving. Then we could load the resulting concrete block aboard a ship. The ship would sail out into the ocean as far as it can, and the crew will dump the block into the water. The block will sink, and the pressure from the water will make it much more difficult for the demon to escape his new prison. And how, pray tell, would we get the demon out of my stomach? The High Dragon asked, eyeing the ever-growing group surrounding us. Oakmore couldn't help but grin as he said, I do believe a simple extrusion will suffice, Your Majesty. Icinerath's growl shook the ground beneath us. You want me to vomit in public? Icinerath hissed. Sire, we can be mindful of your dignity whilst you are ejecting the demon, Oakmore said, unable to hide his grin. We can set up curtains to mask what is being done. Everyone will still know what happened. At least it isn't out the other end, Your Majesty, I added, trying to be helpful. The High Dragon's furious eyes focused on me, and I felt my blood freeze again. I am an idiot, and silently vowed to keep my mouth shut as often as possible. High Dragons do not defecate, boy, he hissed. Really? I asked incredulously, unable to keep my vow. You think I lie? We are smart enough to take care with what we eat, and our bodies use every last bit of what we consume, Icinerath explained. This is true, Nick, Oakmore said. The purpose of a High Dragon's intestinal tract appears to be for flatulence, not defecation. Icinerath slowly turned his attention from me to the regent. If there is a single person in our ever-growing audience that can understand what you just said, I will bite you in half. Apologies, Your Highness. I meant only to educate, not offend, Oakmore said as he lowered his head, masking that his grin had widened. Enough, Icinerath growled. Truth be told, I would enjoy being free of this burden. I will make the arrangements, Your Majesty. Oakmore bowed deeply, then began explaining the plan to some of the gathered people. As he began to walk away, Yolk scooched over to me and gave me a nudge. Nick, he said, could you ask the king if he would mind answering some questions? What? I asked, thinking I may have hallucinated what I had just heard. I want to ask the king some questions. This is an amazingly rare opportunity, he explained. Not only to interview a high dragon, but to interview one with a first-hand account of the Cataclysm Wars. Wait. Don't you want to know how I can talk to him? With 10, obviously, Nash interrupted. Yolk's right, Nick. As long as you're polite with the questions, you've got nothing to be afraid of. Easy for him to say. Icinerath was watching Oakmore, impatiently tapping one of his claws on the ground. The claw in question is easily as big as I am, and I could feel the ground shake slightly with each tap. I'd also noticed that when he had grinned earlier, his teeth were the size of my head. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the High Dragon could erase everyone present if he so wished. Please, Nick, Yash pouted. It was a ridiculous sight that immediately pulled me out of the anxiety spiral I had been swirling down. He pushed his lower lip forward and it caught on his teeth. The lip looked kind of like one of those seashell soap holders. I smiled and shook my head. Fine, but if we die, I want it on the record that it's your fault, I told him, then looked up at the dragon. Excuse me, Your Highness. What is it? Icinerath met my gaze. Would you mind if we asked you some questions? This orc, Yolk, would like to know more about the Cataclysm Wars. The dragon's brow furrowed, then he sighed through his nose. So be it. Ask your questions. He said yes, I told Yolk. Excellent. Ask him what started the war, and if he knows how the demons entered our world. I nodded and repeated the question to Icinerath, settling into the role of interpreter. The demonic invasion was the cause of the war, Icinerath chuckled, though many nations were already at war before their invasion. The demons entered our world through vast portals, though how these portals were created eludes me. I do know that these portals worked both ways, though, as the demons brought many mer back through with them. Who made the wastes? Multiple parties. Demons, Unyels, and mer sorcerers fought viciously to destroy each other's forces, and the mass corruption of nature was the result. Those that were responsible cared little for the environment, or even the safety of their own soldiers. What about the monsters? Who created them? The demons created many monsters to destroy the mer, bastardizing nature's own creations in the process. The mer quickly followed suit, justifying their actions as a means to survive the onslaught. Many of the monsters predate the war, though, and nobody knew where they originate. Why did the demons invade? They did not stop to explain themselves, Icinerath chuckled. If a scholar of this age does not know their reasons, then they must truly be lost to time. What about the demon in your belly? I asked before I told Yolk what the king had said. Wouldn't he know? He is little more than bone. His mind was destroyed by the acids within me long ago. Icinerath shook his head. He wouldn't even know his own name by now. I informed Yolk of the king's response to both of our questions. He nodded and continued his questions. How long have you ruled over Bolasir? Icinerath paused. 1 moment. The king hissed unintelligibly, and his eyes flashed blue for an instant. Whatever just happened caused his brows to rise and his slight smile to fade. By Bogglerath, it has been 18,782 years. It doesn't feel like nearly that long. Apparently time flies more than I do, he said with a sigh. Bogglerath? I asked. The first High Dragon. She was given intelligence as a reward for defeating a god in combat, and became the mother of all High Dragons. She has become somewhat deified, obviously. As I explained this to Yolk, elves and gnomes started bringing supplies to enact Regent Oakmore's plan. Yulk reminded me of what Joni had said about the Prignira account of the Cataclysm Wars and asked me to verify it with King Isinerath. I am unfamiliar with Prignira, but there was an underground dwarven kingdom named Masura on the southern continent. The events themselves are accurate, though I know not of any demonic conspiracies prior to the war. Perhaps they are referring to the actions of the cult, or it could be a convenient cover-up for some of the abysmal actions committed by the various royal families of the time. What kind of actions? Before the demons invaded, the lands were at war. Bolasir was one of the only nations that managed to stay out of it, but my father was wise and had spies in various nations that may have tried something. We received word of terrible state-sanctioned experiments, all in the name of one-upping their neighbors on the field of battle. This is one of the main reasons we reacted to the cult in the way that we did, and why we didn't chase them over our borders. We suspected that they may have had royal backing, and crossing over our borders may have dragged us into wars that we wanted no part of. Yulk appeared deep in thought as I explained what the High Dragon had said. As I finished, Regent Oakmore approached us. "We are nearly ready, Your Majesty," he said, as a group of gnomes carried a large cube-shaped container past him. The gnomes lowered the steel container to the ground with a thud, and two groups of elves approached. One group had bags of what appeared to be powdered concrete mix, and began pouring them into the container. The other group began to set up tall curtains around Isinerath. The High Dragon eyed them warily, but did not interfere. Another group of elves carrying water and oars replaced the group with the concrete powder at the container. They added the water to the powder and began to stir it. We watched as the groups took turns at the container, adding more powder and water until it was nearly filled. Once they were finished, Oakmore gestured to the group around the curtains, and they drew the curtains around the High Dragon. "Your Majesty, please do not regurgitate directly into the box. Your, for lack of a better phrase, stomach juices will likely be detrimental to the concrete," Oakmore explained. "Regurgitate? What a disgusting word," Isinerath hissed. "Fine." His head lowered beneath the curtain, and after a moment a sound that can only be described as disturbingly slimy made its way to our ears. I had expected to hear the sound of retching, but the sound I heard instead nearly made me gag. Like forcing a bowling ball covered in not-quite-done jelly through a hose or something. I looked at my companions and could tell the sound had the same impact on them. Another moment later, Isinerath's head appeared above the curtain. "It is done," he said. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Oakmore gestured to a group of gnomes who were carrying a steel square with small holes in it. The elves dragged the curtain back and the gnomes put the steel square on top of the container, hammering it down to form a lid. The container began to make a sloshing sound, and some concrete splashed out of the holes in the top. "Oh, already?" Oakmore said, sounding flabbergasted. "Cure the concrete, quickly." 4 elves walked up to the container and began casting various spells. The sloshing ceased with a stark crack, and the elves nodded to Oakmore. One of the gnomes walked up, shaking his head. "I think he might have moved around and weakened the concrete, sir," the gnome reported. "That crack wasn't a good sound." "That's all right. We'll just leave the cube in the container." The regent rubbed his chin. "Maybe we'll have a smith weld some bars on it just to be sure." "Yes, your high... Lord Regent," the gnome said, looking at King Isinerath. "Gonna take some getting used to." "Not all, my good mare," Oakmore said with a grin. "Take the container to Horov's smithy. He's got plenty of steel scrap to use as bracing. Let him know that we want the cube to never open again." The gnome nodded and started giving orders to his crew. They, along with some help from the elves, managed to get the steel cube into a cart and started transporting it away. Oakmore watched them for a moment and then turned back to the High Dragon. "Your Highness," he bowed, "this is the perfect occasion for a feast. Will you permit us to celebrate your return to the throne?" "Certainly," Isinerath said. "However, I require some calisthenics. It has been far too long since I've last stretched my wings. Feel free to celebrate without me. I will rejoin you soon. The high dragon stood, causing several shocked gasps from the surrounding crowd. I thought he was huge while he was laying down, but his true height was mind-boggling. He stretched his neck and limbs, and his bones cracked like trees in a storm. Finally, he spread his mighty wings. The white skin on his wings featured blue veins that seemed to form a sort of symbol. Before I could get a good look at it, though, the wings flapped and sent a gust of air at us that nearly sent me sprawling. I managed to see a gnome fly back a foot or two, and when I turned back to the high dragon, he was gone. I looked to the sky to see if I could spot him, but he had disappeared with a frightening speed. The implications of how quickly he had moved set in, and I couldn't help but shudder a little. Big things shouldn't be able to move that fast. It's unnatural. Well, what a fantastic day. Hopefully I can retire soon, Regent Oakmore smiled. I doubt it, Lord Regent, a nearby elf said. You're the only one that understands the king. Oh, shit.